In the peaceful town of Millfield, where church bells rang every Sunday and neighbors greeted each other by name, no one could have imagined the darkness festering behind the pristine white walls of Grace Community Church. Pastor Daniel Thompson was beloved by all, a spiritual guide, a family man, and a pillar of moral virtue. But beneath his charismatic sermons and warm smiles lay secrets so devastating they would ultimately lead to the unthinkable, the murder of his own daughter, Bethany. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how a man of God became an agent of evil, how a father betrayed his child in the most horrific way, and how a small town was forced to confront the truth that sometimes the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes he comes with a Bible in his hand and salvation on his lips. Pastor Daniel Thompson stood at the pulpit of Grace Community Church, his voice rising and falling with practiced precision as he delivered his Sunday sermon. At 45, he cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered with salt and pepper hair that gave him an air of distinguished wisdom beyond his years. His deep blue eyes seemed to connect with each member of the congregation individually, making everyone feel as though his message was meant specifically for them. "Trust," he said, his voice resonating through the vaulted ceiling of the church. "Trust is the foundation of faith. Without trust, we cannot truly know God's plan for us." The irony of his words was lost on the rapt congregation. In the third row, his wife Sarah sat with perfect posture, her blonde hair styled in a modest bob, nodding in agreement. Next to her was their daughter Bethany, recently turned 18, her eyes downcast, fingers fidgeting with the silver cross necklace her father had given her for her 16th birthday. And beside Bethany sat Madison Clark, her best friend since kindergarten. Madison's auburn hair caught the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, creating what looked like a halo around her head. At 17, she was the daughter of the church's most generous benefactors, Richard and Patricia Clark. What no one in the congregation knew, what no one could possibly suspect, was that for the past 6 months, Pastor Thompson had been carrying on a secret affair with Madison, betraying not only his wife and his position, but the very trust he preached about so eloquently. After the service, parishioners lined up to shake Pastor Thompson's hand and thank him for his inspiring words. He greeted each one with a firm handshake and direct eye contact, the perfect image of spiritual leadership. "Wonderful sermon today, Pastor," said Eleanor Winters, an elderly widow who had been attending Grace Community Church for over 40 years. "Thank you, Eleanor. How's that hip of yours doing?" he asked with seemingly genuine concern. "Oh, much better since you prayed for me last week," she replied, beaming. This was the Pastor Thompson everyone knew, attentive, caring, a shepherd tending his flock with dedication. As the last of the congregation filtered out, Sarah approached. Her husband, "Daniel, don't forget we have dinner with the Millers tonight," she reminded him. "I haven't forgotten," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I need to organize some paperwork in my office first. I'll meet you and Bethany at home in an hour." Sarah nodded and turned to leave, not noticing the brief glance her husband exchanged with Madison, who lingered by the church bulletin board, pretending to read the upcoming events. Alone in his office, Pastor Thompson loosened his tie and collapsed into his leather chair. The weight of his double life had been growing heavier by the day. What had begun as innocent mentoring sessions with Madison, discussing her doubts about faith, helping her through her parents' marital troubles, had crossed a line that he, as a man of God and a father, should never have approached. He reached for his phone and saw a text message notification. It was from Madison. "Can we talk? I need to see you." His fingers hovered over the screen. He knew he should end it. He knew he was risking everything: his marriage, his relationship with his daughter, his position at the church, his reputation in the community. But something about Madison had awakened a part of him he'd long suppressed, and the thrill of their forbidden relationship had become an addiction he couldn't break. "Meet me at the lake house tomorrow at 4, he typed back. The lake house was a small cabin owned by the church, ostensibly used for youth retreats and pastoral planning sessions. In reality, it had become the setting for his greatest moral failure. The Thompson family home was a beautiful 2-story colonial on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the church. It featured a manicured lawn, white picket fence, and American flag fluttering gently in the spring breeze. The perfect home for the perfect family. Inside, however, tensions had been mounting. Bethany Thompson sat at her desk, college acceptance letters spread before her. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, her academic achievements had opened doors that most students in Millfield could only dream of. But her father had made it clear he expected her to attend Liberty University, his alma mater, to continue in the religious tradition he had mapped out for her. A knock on her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Bethany, may I come in?" It was her mother. "Sure, Mom." Sarah Thompson entered, her eyes immediately going to the college letters. "Have you made a decision yet? Your father is hoping to announce it at your graduation party next month." Bethany sighed. "I'm still thinking about it." Her mother sat on the edge of the bed. "Honey, I know your father can be insistent, but he only wants what's best for you. Does he? Or does he just want what fits his perfect image?" The bitterness in Bethany's voice was unmistakable. Sarah looked taken aback. "Where is this coming from?" "Your father loves you." Bethany turned back to her desk, unable to meet her mother's eyes. "Sometimes I wonder." The truth was, Bethany had begun to notice changes in her father over the past several months. His temper was shorter, his absences more frequent, his explanations more vague. And then there was the way he looked at Madison, her best friend. Since they were 5 years old, sharing crayons in kindergarten. At first, Bethany had dismissed her suspicions as ridiculous. Her father was a pastor, a man who had devoted his life to God and teaching others about morality. He couldn't be involved with a girl 30 years his junior, a minor, her best friend. But the signs were becoming harder to ignore. There were the text messages she'd glimpsed on his phone, the way Madison had become increasingly uncomfortable around her, the unexplained times when both her father and Madison were unreachable, the subtle changes in how they interacted during youth group meetings. That night at dinner with the Millers, church elders and close family friends, Bethany watched her father charm the room with stories and jokes. To anyone else, he was the same charismatic, caring Pastor Thompson who had led Grace Community Church for the past 15 years. But Bethany could see the cracks in the facade, the moments when his smile didn't quite meet his eyes, the way his gaze would drift to his phone whenever it buzzed. After dinner, as the adults moved to the living room for coffee, Bethany retreated to the Miller's back porch. She needed air, space to think. Her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk to you about something important." Bethany's heart raced. Was Madison finally going to confess? Confirm the suspicions that had been eating away at her for months? She texted back a simple yes. The coffee shop at 3. What Bethany didn't know was that Madison had reached a breaking point of her own. The guilt of betraying her best friend, the manipulation by a man she had trusted as a spiritual leader, and the recent discovery that she might be pregnant had become too much to bear. Madison had decided to end the affair and come clean, to Bethany first, and then, if necessary, to others. The next day, as Bethany waited at Millfield Coffee Company, her mind raced with possibilities. How would she react if Madison confirmed? Her fears? What would this mean for her family, for the church, for the community that had placed so much trust in her father? But Madison never showed up. After waiting for over an hour, Bethany tried calling her friend's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Unusual for Madison, who was typically glued to her phone. Concerned, Bethany drove to the Clark residence, a sprawling Tudor-style home in Millfield's most affluent neighborhood. Patricia Clark answered the door, surprise evident on her face. "Bethany, Madison's not here. She told me she was meeting you." "We were supposed to meet at the coffee shop, but she never showed," Bethany explained, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Patricia frowned. "That's odd. Have you tried calling her?" "Yes, but her phone's off." "Let me try Richard," Patricia said, pulling out her phone to call her husband. After a brief conversation, she turned back to Bethany with a worried expression. "He hasn't heard from her either. This isn't like Madison at all." What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Madison was at the lake house, revealing to Pastor Thompson that she believed she was pregnant and that she couldn't continue their relationship. "I'm going to tell Bethany everything," Madison said, tears streaming down her face. "She deserves to know the truth. She's my best friend, and what we've been doing, it's wrong, Daniel. It's so wrong. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." Pastor Thompson felt the ground shift beneath him. Everything he had built, his reputation, his career, his family, was about to come crashing down. In that moment, the man who had counseled countless parishioners through moral dilemmas faced the ultimate test of his own character, and he failed. "Madison, please," he begged. "Think about what this will do to everyone, to your parents, to the church, to Sarah, to Bethany." "I have thought about it," Madison cried. "That's all I've been thinking about. I can't live with this lie anymore. And if I am pregnant, you don't know that for sure," he interjected, desperation edging into his voice. "But what if I am? What then?" Madison's voice rose. "Were you planning to keep this secret forever? To just pretend nothing ever happened between us?" Pastor Thompson ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. Everything was unraveling. "We need time to think, to plan. Please don't do anything rash." But Madison was resolute. "I'm telling Bethany today. I was supposed to meet her at the coffee shop, but I needed to tell you first. I owe you that much." As Madison reached for her purse, intending to leave, something in Pastor Thompson snapped. The carefully constructed image he had maintained for years, the respected pastor, the loving father, the moral guide, was about to be destroyed. In a moment of panic and rage, he grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. "Daniel, what are you—" Madison's question was cut short as the candlestick connected with her temple. She crumpled to the floor, blood seeping from the wound. Horror-struck by his own actions, Pastor Thompson stood frozen, the candlestick still in his hand. Madison lay motionless at his feet, the beginnings of a pool of blood forming around her. Auburn hair, the hair that had once looked like a halo in the sunlight of his church. At that moment his phone rang. The screen displayed Bethany. His daughter was calling, probably wondering about Madison's whereabouts. With trembling hands, he declined the call and then started again at the scene before him. What had he done? And what would he do now? The reality of his actions sank in. Pastor Thompson's mind began to calculate. Madison's car was parked behind the lake house, out of sight from the main road. No one knew she was here with him. If he could dispose of her body, he might be able to maintain the lie a little longer. But even as he began to formulate a plan, he couldn't silence the voice in his head. Not the voice of God or conscience, but the cold, calculating voice of self-preservation. Madison had told him she was going to meet Bethany. If Madison disappeared without a trace, Bethany would. No, she had intended to tell her something important. It wouldn't take long for his daughter to piece things together. Bethany was the link that could expose everything. As darkness fell over Millfield, two families grew increasingly concerned about Madison's disappearance. The Clarks had called the police, who had taken a missing persons report, but advised that teenagers often took off for a few hours without warning. Bethany had returned home, her worry turning to fear as night approached with still no word from her friend. Pastor Thompson arrived home well after dinner, claiming he had been counseling a parishioner in crisis. Sarah accepted his explanation without question, but Bethany watched him with growing suspicion. There was something different about him, a tension in his shoulders, a distraction in his gaze. "Dad, have you heard from Madison?" she asked directly. "She was supposed to meet me today, but she never showed up. Her parents haven't heard from her either." For a split second, something flashed across her father's face. Was it fear? Guilt? But it was gone so quickly, Bethany wasn't sure she had seen it at all. "No, I haven't," he replied, his voice steady, "but I'm sure she's fine. You know how teenagers can be unpredictable." "Not Madison," Bethany insisted. "She wouldn't just disappear, especially not when she was the one who asked to meet. She said she needed to talk to me about something important." Pastor Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did she say what it was about?" "No," Bethany admitted. "But she seemed, I don't know, urgent, upset." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if I hear anything, I'll let you know right away. Try not to worry too much. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." As he turned to head upstairs, Bethany noticed something else strange, a small dark stain on the cuff of his shirt. It looked like blood. A chill ran down her spine. Later that night, unable to sleep, Bethany crept downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed her father's study, she noticed the light was on, a sliver of illumination visible beneath the Adria. She heard his voice, low and urgent, though she couldn't make out the words. Curious, she moved closer to the door. "I took care of it," she heard him say. "The lake house is clean. No one saw me. Yes, I'm sure, and the boat launch was deserted at that hour." Bethany's blood ran cold. What was her father talking about? Who was he speaking to? And what did the lake house, the church retreat property that her father had access to, have to do with anything? Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Madison's strange behavior, her father's unexplained absences, the secretive text messages, and now Madison's disappearance and her father's suspicious behavior. The conclusion was too terrible to contemplate, but Bethany couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. As she stood frozen outside her father's study, the floorboard beneath her foot creaked. The voice inside went silent. "Hello?" her father called. "Out. Is someone there?" Bethany fled silently back to her room, her heart pounding. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a terrifying realization dawned on her. If her suspicions were correct, and if her father realized she knew or even suspected the truth, she might be in danger too. The next morning, Bethany awoke to the sound of police sirens. Looking out her window, she saw two police cruisers parked in front of the house. Downstairs, she found her mother sitting ashen-faced at the kitchen table, her father standing by the window, his back rigid. "What's happening?" Bethany asked, though a part of her already knew. Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "They found Madison's car abandoned near Crescent Lake. There's no sign of her, but—" Her voice broke. "They found blood on the passenger seat." Bethany's eyes flew to her father, who remained facing the window. "They want to talk to everyone who was close to Madison," Sarah continued. "The police are interviewing all her friends and family." When Pastor Thompson finally turned around, his face was a mask of concern. "This is a terrible situation," he said, his voice steady. "We need to cooperate fully with the authorities and pray for Madison's safe return." But as their eyes met, Bethany saw something in her father's gaze that sent chills down her spine. A cold calculation, an unspoken warning. In that moment, she knew with certainty that her father was responsible for whatever had happened to Madison. And she knew something else as well. She was not safe in her own home. The police interviews were conducted in the Thompson living room. Detective Laura Rodriguez, a seasoned investigator with the Millfield Police Department, asked standard questions about Madison's habits, friends, and state of mind in the days leading up to her disappearance. She seemed distracted lately, Bethany offered cautiously, aware of her father's gaze on her. Like something was bothering her. Any idea what that might have been? Detective Rodriguez asked. Bethany hesitated, her mind racing. Should she voice her suspicions now? Without proof, would anyone believe that the beloved Pastor Thompson could be involved in something so heinous? And if she spoke up and was wrong, she would destroy her family for nothing. I'm not sure, she finally said. She was going to tell me yesterday, but she never showed up for our coffee date. Throughout the interview, Pastor Thompson maintained his role as the concerned spiritual leader, offering prayers for Madison's safe return and promising the church's full support in the search efforts. To anyone else, he appeared to be the same compassionate pastor they had always known. But to Bethany, every word, every gesture now seemed calculated and false. After the police left, promising to keep the family updated on the investigation, an uncomfortable silence fell over the Thompson household. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, her way of coping with stress. Pastor Thompson retreated to his study, claiming he needed to prepare a special prayer service for Madison. Bethany retreated to her room, her mind whirling with terrible possibilities and desperate plans. She needed evidence, something concrete that would either confirm or disprove her suspicions. And she needed to be careful. If her father truly was responsible for Madison's disappearance, and if he suspected that Bethany knew, her life could be in danger. That night, Bethany lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Around midnight, she heard her father's study door open and his footsteps moving toward the garage. The sound of a car engine starting followed. Where was he going at this hour? Making a split-second decision, Bethany grabbed her phone and a jacket. She crept downstairs and peered out the window, just in time to see her father's car turning right at the end of their street, toward Crescent Lake. Heart pounding, Bethany slipped out of the house and into her own car. She would follow at a distance, careful not to be seen. Whatever her father was doing on this midnight drive, she suspected it was connected to Madison's disappearance, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. As she drove through the silent streets of Millfield, following the distant taillights of her father's car, Bethany couldn't shake the feeling that she was heading toward a revelation that would shatter her world forever. What she didn't realize was that she was also driving toward her own fate, a confrontation with her father that would end in the ultimate betrayal. Bethany's hands gripped the steering wheel as she maintained a careful distance behind her father's black SUV. The midnight roads were empty, allowing her to follow without the cover of other traffic, forcing her to hang back even further to avoid detection. Her headlights remained off whenever possible, navigating only by the dim glow of the dashboard and occasional street lamps that dotted the rural route to Crescent Lake. Questions raced through her mind faster than the scenery passing outside. Her windows. Why was her father driving to the lake in the middle of the night? What connection did this have to Madison's disappearance? And most chillingly, what would she do if her worst fears were confirmed? The road began to wind as they approached the lake area, tall pines creating tunnels of darkness broken only by the intermittent moonlight. Pastor Thompson's SUV slowed as it turned onto the unmarked dirt road that led to the church's lake house. Bethany drove past the turnoff, pulling onto the shoulder about 100 yards ahead, killing her engine and lights. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she weighed her options. Following her father on foot seemed the most prudent choice. She slipped out of her car grateful for the dark clothing she'd instinctively chosen. The night air carried the damp chill of the lake, causing her to pull her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Moving quietly through the underbrush that bordered the dirt road, Bethany made her way back toward the lake house. The modest cabin came into view, its weathered wood nearly invisible against the night, except for a single light illuminating an upstairs window. Her father's SUV was parked haphazardly near the dock, its front end angled toward the water. Bethany crouched behind a large rhododendron, watching as her father emerged from the cabin, carrying what appeared to be a shovel and a large duffel bag. She stifled a gasp, pressing her hand against her mouth. The pieces were falling into place. With horrifying clarity, Madison's blood in her car, her father's suspicious behavior, the midnight trip to a secluded location, the shovel. Something terrible had happened here, and her father was covering his tracks. Pastor Thompson walked with purpose toward a dense copse of trees, about 50 yards from the cabin, disappearing into the darkness. Bethany waited, counting to 60. To ensure he was fully engaged in whatever grim task had brought him here, then moved silently toward the cabin. If there was evidence, it would be inside. The door was unlocked. Her father clearly hadn't expected anyone to follow him. Bethany slipped inside, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the familiar space. The main room appeared normal at first glance. Rustic furniture, a stone fireplace, religious texts stacked on the coffee table. But as her light swept across the wooden floor, she noticed something the hasty cleaning had missed. A dark stain soaked into the floorboards near the fireplace. Bethany knelt down, her stomach churning as she touched the stain. It was still slightly tacky, recent bloodshed, incompletely cleaned. Next to the stain lay a small object that caught the beam of her flashlight. Bethany picked it up, a delicate silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. She recognized it immediately. She'd helped Madison pick it out for her 16th birthday. Her hand trembled as she pocketed the damning evidence. The sound of footsteps on the porch sent a jolt of panic through her body. Her father was returning sooner than expected. Bethany quickly switched off her flashlight and looked frantically for a hiding place. The closet would be too obvious, the bathroom too small. Her only option was upstairs. She moved silently up the creaking steps, praying that her father wouldn't hear. The door at the top opened to a small bedroom, the one whose light she'd seen from outside. Evidently her father had been here earlier. The bed was unmade, and a Bible lay open on the nightstand, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on Bethany. Front door opened. Pastor Thompson's heavy footsteps moved across the main room below. Bethany could hear him muttering to himself, though she couldn't make out the words. She edged toward the small closet in the bedroom, slipping inside just as her father began to ascend the stairs. Through a crack in the closet door, Bethany watched as her father entered the bedroom. He looked different, disheveled, his clothes stained with dirt, his face etched with lines of stress she'd never seen before. This wasn't the polished, confident Pastor Thompson who commanded the pulpit each Sunday. This was a man unraveling. He sat heavily on the bed, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, he appeared to be praying, his lips moving silently. Then he reached for his phone and dialed a number. "It's done," he said after a moment, his voice barely audible. "I've moved. No one will find her now." A pause. "Yes, the lake house is clean except for... No, I'm handling it tonight. By morning, there won't be any trace." Bethany's blood ran cold. Who was he talking to? Did someone else know about what had happened to Madison? "Bethany suspects something," her father continued, causing her breath to catch in her throat. "I saw it in her eyes today during the police interview. She knows more than she's saying." Another pause. "I don't know what to do about her. If she talks to the police..." The implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Bethany felt dizzy with fear, struggling to control her breathing as she realized the extent of the danger she was in. Her own father was contemplating silencing her, just as he had apparently silenced Madison. "I need more time to think," Pastor Thompson finally said. "I'll be home in an hour. We can discuss it then." He ended the call and sat motionless for several long minutes, staring at nothing. Eventually he rose and moved to a small desk in the corner of the room. He opened the drawer and removed what Bethany recognized as Madison's phone, the one that had been going straight to voicemail. Her father powered it on, the screen's blue glow illuminating his face with an eerie light. He appeared to be scrolling through messages, deleting evidence. Suddenly a notification sound pinged from his own phone. He checked it, and a look of alarm crossed his face. He quickly pocketed Madison's phone, grabbed his jacket, and hurried from the room. Moments later, Bethany heard the SUV's engine start and the crunch of tires on gravel as he drove away. She waited 5 full minutes before emerging from the closet, her legs nearly buckling with relief and terror. She just witnessed her father covering up what could only be Madison's murder, and now she knew he was considering her a threat that needed to be handled. Bethany moved quickly through the cabin, searching for any additional evidence. In the kitchen, she found a trash bag containing bloody paper towels and a man's dress shirt, her father's, with dark stains on the sleeve. Using her phone, she photographed everything she found, including the blood stain on the floor and Madison's bracelet. As she prepared to leave, a terrible thought struck her. Her father had said he'd moved her. If Madison's body had been hidden somewhere on the property, this might be her only chance to find it and provide the proof needed to bring her father to justice. The full moon had emerged from behind the clouds, providing just enough light to navigate the grounds surrounding the lake house. Bethany followed the path her father had taken earlier toward the copse of trees. The disturbed earth was immediately evident, a rectangular patch about 6 feet long. Her father had buried something or someone here, but the soil appeared untouched now. This wasn't where he had moved Madison. Bethany's gaze shifted to the lake. The dock extended about 20 feet into the water, and at its end was a small motorboat used for church fishing retreats. Had her father used the boat to dispose of Madison's body in the deeper parts of the lake? Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother. "Where are you? Dad just called looking for you. He sounds worried." Worried wasn't the word Bethany would have chosen. Her father wasn't concerned for her safety. He was concerned about what she knew. She didn't respond to the text, knowing it would only reveal that her phone was active and potentially trackable. She needed to get to the police, to show them the evidence she'd gathered. But would they believe her accusations against Pastor Daniel Thompson, beloved community leader? And what about her mother? Was she involved too? The person her father had been speaking to on the phone. Could it have been Sarah? Bethany couldn't take that chance. She couldn't go home. Not tonight. Not until she had somewhere safe to turn. As she made her way back to her car, a new text appeared. This one from an unknown number. "I know what your father did. Meet me at Miller's Point, 1 a.m. Miller's Point was a scenic overlook about 10 miles north of the lake. It was a popular spot for teenagers to hang out, though it would be deserted at this hour. Bethany hesitated, anxiety churning in her stomach. Was this a trap, or was there someone else who knew the truth about her father? The digital clock on her dashboard read 12:40 a.m. She had 20 minutes to decide whether to meet this mysterious text. In the end, curiosity and desperation won out over caution. Starting her car, she pulled back onto the main road, heading north toward Miller's Point. The overlook was empty when she arrived. The sweeping vista of Millfield's lights spread out. Below, like a constellation of earthbound stars. Bethany parked near the guardrail and waited, scanning constantly for approaching headlights. At precisely 1 a.m., another car pulled into the overlook, a silver sedan she didn't recognize. A figure emerged from the driver's side, and Bethany's breath caught. It was Robert Hayes, her father's assistant pastor at Grace Community Church. In his early 30s, Robert had always been kind to Bethany, though they'd never been particularly close. What did he know about her father's secrets? "Bethany," Robert said as he approached her car, his expression grave. "Thank you for coming. It's not safe for you at home right now." "You know about Madison?" Bethany asked, still wary. Robert nodded, his face etched with guilt. "I've suspected your father was involved with her for months. I confronted him about it last week and told him I would go to the church elders if he didn't end it." He ran a hand through his hair. "Then Madison disappeared, and I just knew something terrible had happened. He killed her," Bethany said, the words feeling surreal as they left her lips. "At the lake house, I found blood and her bracelet, and I overheard him talking about moving her body." Robert closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. "I was afraid of that. When I heard you'd gone missing tonight too, I panicked. I thought maybe he's considering it," Bethany said coldly. "I heard him on the phone discussing what to do about me. That's why I can't go home. Do you have evidence? Something concrete we can take to the police?" Bethany showed him the photos she'd taken at the lake house, as well as Madison's bracelet. Robert examined them carefully. "This might be enough to start an investigation, but your father is a powerful man in this community. The police chief attends Grace Community. So does Judge Wilson. We need to be certain." "What are you suggesting?" Bethany asked. "We need a confession," Robert replied grimly. "Something recorded, something that can't be explained away." "And how exactly do we get that?" Robert hesitated before responding. "Your father trusts me. If I tell him I know what happened and want to help him cover it up, he might open up. We could record the conversation." The plan was dangerous, but Bethany couldn't see another option. If she went directly to the police with her circumstantial evidence, her father would likely be able to talk his way out of it. His reputation in the community was sterling. Hers was that of a somewhat rebellious teenager who had recently been clashing with her father over college choices. "What about my mother?" Bethany asked. "Do you think she knows?" Robert's expression darkened. "I don't know. The person your father called tonight. It could have been her, or it could have been someone else from the church who's helping him." "I can't believe this is happening," Bethany whispered, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. Her father was a murderer, her best friend was dead, and now she was planning to entrap her own father with the help of his assistant pastor. "You can stay at my sister's apartment tonight," Robert offered. "She's out of town for the week. It's safe there. Tomorrow we can figure out how to approach your father." Bethany nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to argue. She followed Robert's sedan through the quiet streets of Millfield to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. His sister's place was modest but clean, with a spare bedroom where Bethany could rest. "Try to get some sleep," Robert advised, as he prepared to leave. "I'll tell your parents I ran into you at an all-night diner, that you were upset about Madison and needed space. It should buy us some time." After Robert left, Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. She scrolled through her phone, looking at old photos of herself and Madison at the beach last summer, at homecoming in their formal dresses, building a snowman when they were younger. How had everything gone so wrong? How had her father, the man who had baptized her, taught her Bible verses, and prayed over her when she was sick, become this monster capable of murdering an innocent girl? Sleep finally claimed her in the early hours of the morning, but her dreams were haunted by images of Madison floating in the dark waters of Crescent Lake, and her father standing at the pulpit, hands raised in prayer, blood dripping from his fingertips. She was awakened by her phone ringing. It was her mother. "Bethany, where are you? We've been worried sick." Sarah's voice was strained with what sounded like genuine concern. "I'm fine, Mom. Pastor Robert told you, right? I just needed some space to think about everything that's happening with Madison." "He told us," Sarah confirmed, "but your father wants you to come home now. This isn't the time to be alone. We should be together as a family." The subtle pressure in her mother's voice raised Bethany's suspicions. Was Sarah just being a concerned parent, or was she trying to lure Bethany home at her father's behest? "I'll be home later today," Bethany promised vaguely. "I just need a few more hours." "Bethany, listen to me." Sarah's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Whatever you think you know, whatever you think is happening, you need to come home and talk to your father and me. Things aren't what they seem." "What do you mean?" Bethany asked, her heart racing. "I can't say more on the phone. Just come home, please." The call ended, leaving Bethany more confused than ever. What had her mother meant? Was she trying to warn Bethany or trap her? And what did Sarah know about Madison's disappearance? Robert returned mid-morning with coffee and pastries from the local bakery. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept no better than Bethany. "Your father called an emergency meeting of the church elders for this afternoon," he informed her as they sat at the small kitchen table. "He says it's about organizing a prayer vigil for Madison, but I think he's trying to shore up support. He knows accusations might be coming." "My mother called this morning," Bethany said. "She was acting strange, saying things aren't what they seem, and that I need to come home and talk to them." Robert frowned. "That could mean anything. She might know the truth and want to protect you, or she might be helping your father set a trap." "So what's our plan?" Bethany asked, sipping the too-hot coffee and welcoming the burn as a distraction from her fears. "The elders' meeting is at 2. Your father always arrives early to prepare the conference room. I'll go early too, confront him alone, and record our conversation." Robert pulled out his phone. "I've installed an app that will record even when the screen is locked. What if he doesn't confess? What if he realizes what you're doing?" "Then we go to Plan B. We take what evidence we have to Detective Rodriguez. She seems sharp, less likely to be swayed by your father's position in the community." The plan was set. Robert would meet with Pastor Thompson at 1:30 p.m., an hour before the elders were scheduled to arrive. Bethany would wait at a cafe across from the church, ready to call the police if Robert texted a distress signal, the word Amen. As Robert prepared to leave for the confrontation, Bethany felt a growing sense of dread. Something about the plan felt wrong, rushed perhaps, but she couldn't identify a better alternative. Her father was covering his tracks meticulously. Soon there might be no evidence left to find. "Be careful," she told Robert as he headed for the door. "My father isn't who we thought he was. He's already been killed once." Robert nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we need to stop him before anyone else gets hurt." He hesitated at the door. "Bethany, if something goes wrong and I don't come back, go straight to Detective Rodriguez. Don't go home. Don't call your mother. Just go directly to the police." Bethany watched from the window as Robert's silver sedan pulled away, carrying him toward a confrontation with a man who had already demonstrated he was willing to kill to protect his secrets. She checked her phone, 12:45 p.m. In less than an hour, Robert would be face to face with her father, attempting to extract a confession. What Bethany didn't know was that her father had already set his own plan in motion, a plan that would lead to another death that day and bring her face to face with the darkest truth of all. The Cornerstone Cafe buzzed with the quiet hum of afternoon customers as Bethany sat at a window table, her untouched sandwich growing stale before her. From this vantage point, she had a perfect view of Grace Community Church across the street. The place that had been her spiritual home for her entire life, now transformed into something sinister by her father's actions. The church's white steeple gleamed in the afternoon sun, its shadow stretching across the parking lot where Robert's silver sedan sat alongside her father's black SUV. Bethany checked her watch. 1:45 p.m. Robert had been inside with her father for 15 minutes. Already, her phone lay on the table, screen up, ready to receive either a triumphant message that her father had confessed or the distress signal that would send her running to the police. "Can I get you anything else, honey?" The waitress, Marge, a fixture at the cafe for as long as Bethany could remember, paused at her table. "No, thank you," Bethany replied, forcing a smile. "You doing okay?" "You look a bit peaked," Marge observed with the familiar concern of someone who had watched Bethany grow up. "Just worried about Madison," Bethany said, which wasn't a lie. Marge's face softened with sympathy. "We all are, sweetie. Your daddy's organizing that prayer vigil for this evening, isn't he? If anyone can bring that girl home safe, it's Pastor Thompson." The irony was so bitter Bethany could taste it, but she nodded mutely. Marge moved on to other customers, leaving Bethany alone with her thoughts and mounting anxiety. Inside the church conference room, Pastor Daniel Thompson was arranging papers for the elders' meeting when Robert Hayes entered. The younger pastor looked uncharacteristically serious, his normally friendly demeanor replaced by a rigid formality. "Robert," Daniel greeted him with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're early." "We need to talk, Daniel." Robert replied, closing the door behind him. His hand slipped into his pocket, activating the recording app on his phone. "About Madison Clark." Pastor Thompson's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. "What about her? Have there been developments? Has she been found?" "I think you know exactly where she is," Robert said quietly. "And I think you know what happened to her." A tense silence filled the room. Pastor Thompson set down the papers. He'd been arranging, his movements deliberate and controlled. "That's a very serious implication, Robert. Choose your next words carefully." "I know about your relationship with her," Robert continued, moving further into the room. "I've suspected for months, but I didn't want to believe it. A man of God, a husband, a father, involved with a teenage girl. You're making dangerous accusations without evidence." Pastor Thompson's voice remained calm, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Madison is missing. Our focus should be on finding her, not spreading malicious rumors." "I spoke with Bethany last night," Robert said, watching closely for Daniel's reaction. "She was at the lake house. She found blood, Daniel, and Madison's bracelet." Pastor Thompson's composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise flickering across his face. "Bethany was at the lake house? When?" "She followed you there," Robert answered. "She saw everything. The blood, the fresh earth where you buried something, the cleanup you were doing. She heard your phone conversation about handling her because she knows too much." Pastor Thompson moved toward the window, looking out at the church parking lot as if gathering his thoughts. When he turned back, his expression had transformed into one of paternal concern. "Robert, I'm worried about Bethany. She's been acting erratically since Madison's disappearance. They were very close, you know. This accusation, this fantasy she's created, it suggests she might be having some kind of breakdown." "Stop it, Daniel," Robert snapped. "Stop lying. I've seen the evidence myself. Madison's blood is on the floor of the lake house. You killed her, didn't you, when she threatened to expose your relationship?" For several long moments, Pastor Thompson simply stared at Robert, as if measuring him, calculating. Then something shifted in his demeanor, the righteous facade crumbling to reveal something colder, more calculating underneath. "What exactly do you want, Robert?" he asked finally, his voice lower, harder. "I want the truth," Robert replied, "and then I want to know how we're going to handle this." "We?" Pastor Thompson raised an eyebrow. "The church can't afford this scandal, Daniel. None of us can. If this gets out, Grace Community will be destroyed. Lives will be ruined. Not just yours, but everyone connected to this church." Understanding dawned in Pastor Thompson's eyes. "You're offering to help me cover this up?" Robert swallowed hard, forcing himself to nod. If we can find a way to resolve this that protects the church, that keeps Bethany safe. Bethany, Pastor Thompson sighed, shaking his head. My own daughter, my flesh and blood. Do you know what it's like to realize your child might destroy everything you've built? She doesn't have to, Robert urged. We can find a solution, but first I need to know exactly what happened with Madison. The truth, Daniel, all of it. Pastor Thompson walked to the conference room door, checked that it was securely closed, then returned to face Robert. Madison was going to tell Bethany everything, about us, about the baby she thought she was carrying. She was pregnant? Robert asked, genuine shock in his voice. She thought she might be. Pastor Thompson clarified. Tests later showed she wasn't. But she didn't know that when she threatened to expose us. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. I tried to reason with her at the lake house. Things escalated. I didn't mean to hurt her, Robert. It was an accident. But you didn't call for help, Robert pointed out. You didn't report the accident. How could I? Pastor Thompson spread, his hands in a gesture of helplessness. By the time I realized what I'd done, she was gone. Making it public would have destroyed everything. My family, this church, the community. One mistake, one moment of weakness. I couldn't let it unravel decades of good work. So you disposed of her body? Where, Daniel? Where did you put her? Pastor Thompson's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why do you need to know that? Because if anyone else finds her, this all falls apart, Robert explained. I need to know if your disposal method was secure, or if we need to move her again. Pastor Thompson studied Robert's face for several long seconds, then seemed to come to a decision. The lake, weighted down in the deepest part. No one will find her there. And Bethany? What are you planning to do about her? A shadow passed across Pastor Thompson's features. I haven't decided yet. Ideally, I'd convince her she's mistaken, that grief over Madison's disappearance is making her imagine things. And if that doesn't work, Robert pressed, then other measures might be necessary, Pastor Thompson replied coldly. Bethany at a treatment facility for mental health issues might be believable. The stress of her friend's disappearance triggered a breakdown. You'd institutionalize your own daughter. Robert couldn't keep the horror from his voice. I'd do what's necessary to protect my life's work, Pastor Thompson answered. This church, this community, they need me, Robert. One girl's death, tragic as it is, doesn't outweigh the good I can still do for thousands of others. And Sarah, your wife, what does she know? Pastor Thompson's laugh was hollow. Sarah suspects something's wrong. But she's spent 20 years perfecting the art of not asking questions she doesn't want the answers to. She called Bethany this morning on my instruction, trying to get her to come home where I can contain the situation. Robert nodded slowly, as if processing all this information. I want to help, Daniel, but you need to trust me completely. Where is Bethany now? Pastor Thompson's eyes narrowed. You tell me. You spoke with her last night, didn't you? She wouldn't tell me where she was staying, Robert lied. She doesn't fully trust me yet. Well, when you find her, let me know immediately, Pastor Thompson instructed. The elders will be here soon. We'll proceed with plans for the prayer. A vigil as if nothing has changed. Tonight, after everyone has gone home, we can discuss next steps. Of course, Robert agreed, moving toward the door. I should prepare for the meeting. Robert, Pastor Thompson called, stopping him. I'm trusting you with everything now. Don't make me regret it. Robert nodded once, then left the conference room, his hand still clutching his phone in his pocket. As soon as he was in the empty hallway, he checked to confirm the recording had worked. It had. Every damning word captured clearly. He quickly texted Bethany, "Got it. Meet me at the police station in 30 minutes. Across the street at the Cornerstone Cafe, Bethany's phone lit up with Robert's message. Relief flooded through her as she threw some cash on the table and hurried out to her car. They had the evidence they needed to bring her father to justice. What she didn't see was her father watching from the church window, his eyes tracking her movement across the street. Nor did she see him pull out his phone and make a call, his expression grim with determination. Robert never made it to the police station. As he walked to his car in the church parking lot, a dark sedan pulled up alongside him. The passenger window rolled down to reveal Jack Wilson, one of the church elders, and more importantly, Millfield's chief of police. "Pastor Hayes," Chief Wilson greeted him. "Pastor Thompson asked me to come by early. Said you had something important to share about Madison Clark's disappearance?" Robert hesitated, instantly wary. Chief Wilson was one of Daniel Thompson's closest allies in the community. "I was actually just heading to the station," he said carefully. "No need," Wilson smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "We can talk right here. Why don't you get in?" "I'd rather follow in my own car," Robert insisted. Chief Wilson's smile faded. "Pastor Hayes, I'm not asking. Get in the car now." Robert glanced around, noticing for the first time that the parking lot had emptied. The other elders wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. He was alone with Chief Wilson, who was now revealing a service pistol held low against his leg. "You don't want to do this, Jack," Robert said quietly. "Whatever Pastor Thompson has told you, the truth is much worse." "The truth," Wilson scoffed, "is that you've been acting erratically, making wild accusations against a respected community leader and possibly interfering with a police investigation. Now get in the car before I have to consider you a threat." Robert saw no choice but to comply. As he slid into the passenger seat, Chief Wilson quickly removed Robert's phone from his pocket. "Password?" he demanded. When Robert refused to answer, Wilson simply dropped the phone on the asphalt and crushed it under his boot before getting back in the car. The recording, their evidence against Pastor Thompson, was destroyed. Meanwhile, Bethany waited, anxiously outside the Millfield police station. 30 minutes passed, then 45. Robert still hadn't appeared. She tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A sense of dread began to build in her stomach. Something had gone wrong. Making a difficult decision, she entered the police station alone. At the front desk, she asked to speak with Detective Rodriguez. "She's out on a call," the desk sergeant informed her. "Can someone else help you?" "It's about Madison Clark," Bethany said. "I have information about her disappearance." The sergeant immediately became more attentive. "Chief Wilson is personally overseeing that case. Let me see if he's available." "No," Bethany exclaimed, causing the sergeant to look at her strangely. I'd rather wait for Detective Rodriguez. It's sensitive information." The sergeant frowned. "Chief Wilson is expected back soon. You can wait over there." He gestured to a row of plastic chairs against the wall. Bethany sat, her mind racing. If Chief Wilson was involved, going to the police might have been a terrible mistake. But where was Robert, and what should she do now? Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Your friend Robert is safe for now. If you want him to stay that way, go to the lake house. Come alone. No police." Bethany's blood ran cold. Her father had Robert, and now he was luring her to an isolated location. It was a trap, clearly, but what choice did she have? Robert had risked everything to help her. She couldn't abandon him. As she rose to leave the police station, Detective Rodriguez entered. The female detective gave Bethany a curious look. "Bethany Thompson, were you waiting to see me?" Bethany hesitated. This might be her only chance to get help from someone not under her father's influence. But if she involved the police, what would happen to Robert? I was just leaving," Bethany said finally. "It wasn't important." Detective Rodriguez studied her face. "Are you sure? You look troubled." "I'm fine," Bethany insisted, edging toward the door. "Just worried about Madison." "We all are," Rodriguez replied. "If you think of anything that might help us find her, my door is always open." Bethany nodded and hurried out to her car. She had made her decision. She would go to the lake house. But she wouldn't go unprepared. Pulling out her phone, she composed a detailed email to Detective Rodriguez, attaching the photos she'd taken at the lake house and explaining everything she knew about her father's involvement in Madison's disappearance. She set the email to send automatically in 2 hours if she didn't cancel it. It was her insurance policy, her final card to play if things went badly at the lake house. The drive to Crescent Lake felt both interminable and too quick. Afternoon had given way to early evening, the sun beginning its descent behind the mountains that ringed the western edge of the lake. As Bethany pulled up to the lake house, she saw her father's SUV parked outside, but no sign of any other vehicles. She paused before exiting her car, gathering her courage. Whatever awaited her inside, her father's rage, his manipulation, perhaps even violence, she would face it with the truth as her shield. Madison deserved justice, and Bethany was determined to see that she got it. The lake house door opened before she could knock. Her father stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Bethany," he said, his voice holding none of the warmth it once had. "Come in." She stepped inside cautiously. "Where's Robert?" "Safe," Pastor Thompson replied vaguely. "For now, his future depends largely on your cooperation." Bethany scanned the main room. No sign of Robert or anyone else. "Are you alone?" Chief Wilson had to return to the station. "He's handling some administrative details regarding Pastor Hayes." Her father gestured to the couch. "Sit down, Bethany. We need to talk." She remained standing. "I know what you did to Madison. I know about your affair with her. I found her bracelet here, Dad. I saw the blood." Pastor Thompson sighed heavily. "Yes, I imagined you had. That's why we're here, to decide what happens next." "What happens next is you tell the police the truth," Bethany insisted. "You confess to killing Madison and tell them where you put her body, so her parents can give her a proper burial." Her father shook his head slowly. "That's not going to happen, Bethany. Do you understand what that would do? To our family, to this community, to the thousands of people who rely on this church for spiritual guidance and support." "I don't care," Bethany shouted, her composure finally cracking. "You killed my best friend. You were having an affair with a teenage girl, and when she threatened to expose you, you murdered her. How can you stand there talking about spiritual guidance?" "It was an accident," Pastor Thompson said, his voice hardening. "I never meant to hurt Madison. She was hysterical, threatening to tell everyone about us, about the baby she thought she was carrying. She came at me, and I just reacted. The candlestick was in my hand before I knew it." "And afterward?" Bethany challenged. "When you cleaned up her blood? When you weighed down her body and sank it in the lake? Were those accidents too?" Her father's face darkened. "I made choices to protect what matters most. This church, our family." "Don't you dare include me in this," Bethany interrupted. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself, your reputation, your power. You're too young to understand the complexities." "I understand right from wrong," Bethany shot back. "Something you apparently forgot somewhere along the way. Where is Robert? What have you done with him?" Pastor Thompson moved toward the window, looking out at the darkening lake. "Robert is with Chief Wilson. He's being held on charges of interfering with the police investigation and making false accusations against a public figure. The recording he made of our conversation has been destroyed." Bethany felt her last hope slipping away. Without that recording, it would be her word against her father's, the rebellious teenager versus the respected pastor. "It doesn't matter," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I've sent everything I know to Detective Rodriguez, the photos, Madison's bracelet, my testimony. It's set to deliver automatically if I don't stop it within the next hour and a half." Her father turned to face her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "You're bluffing." Check my phone if you don't believe me, Bethany challenged. Holding it out, Pastor Thompson snatched the phone, quickly navigating through her email application. His face paled as he saw the scheduled message. "Cancel it," he demanded, thrusting the phone back at her. "Not until you tell me where Madison is and release Robert," Bethany countered. "I want to hear you confess everything, and I want Robert free and unharmed." For a moment, father and daughter stood locked in a battle of wills. Then, unexpectedly, the lake house door opened. Bethany turned, expecting to see Chief Wilson, or perhaps another church elder, enlisted in her father's cover-up. Instead, her mother walked in. Sarah Thompson looked exhausted, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Enough," she said quietly. "This has gone far enough." "Sarah," Pastor Thompson warned, "stay out of this. I'm handling it." "Like you handled Madison?" Sarah shot back, her voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Like you've handled everything else, with your lies and manipulation." Bethany stared at her mother in shock. "Mom, you know." Sarah turned to her daughter, regret etched in every line of her face. "Not everything. Not at first. But enough. I've suspected your father was unfaithful for years, though I never imagined with Madison." Her voice broke. "When she disappeared, and then you started asking questions, I began to piece things together. She doesn't understand what's at stake," Pastor Thompson insisted. "Everything we've built, what you've built is a house of lies," Sarah interrupted. "And I've been complicit by looking the other way for too long. Not anymore." She turned to Bethany. "I called Detective Rodriguez after you left the police station. She's on her way here now. So is Robert. He's fine. Chief Wilson let him go when the detective started asking too many questions." Pastor Thompson's face contorted with rage. "You had no right." "I had every right," Sarah shot back. "As Madison's friend, as Bethany's mother, as a human being with a conscience." Bethany moved to her mother's side, the two women standing united against the man who had betrayed them both so completely. "It's over, Dad," Bethany said softly. "Tell us where Madison is. Give her parents the closure they deserve." For a moment, it seemed as though Pastor Thompson might lunge at them, his body tense with barely contained fury. Then, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, he collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "The lake," he whispered, "about 200 yards out from the dock. I weighed her body and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The sound of car engines and crunching gravel announced the arrival of the police. Detective Rodriguez entered first, followed by two uniformed officers. Robert Hayes came in behind them, looking shaken but unharmed. "Daniel Thompson," Detective Rodriguez began formally. "You're under arrest for the murder of Madison Clark." As the detective continued reading him his rights, Pastor Thompson sat motionless, all pretense of righteousness finally stripped away. The man who had preached about truth and salvation for decades was revealed at last for what he truly was: a fraud, a predator, and a murderer. Outside, more police vehicles arrived, including a dive team that would begin the grim task of recovering Madison's body from the depths of Crescent Lake. Bethany and her mother stood on the shore, arms around each other, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon. "What happens now?" Bethany asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. We rebuild somehow. We remember Madison. We tell the truth, always." Detective Rodriguez approached them. "We'll need both of your statements. And Bethany, that evidence you gathered was crucial. If you hadn't been so persistent—" Bethany nodded, unable to take any satisfaction in the detective's praise. Her best friend was dead. Her father was a murderer. The community she'd grown up in would be shattered by scandal. There was no victory here, only tragedy. As night fell completely over Crescent Lake, the searchlights from the police boats created eerie patterns on the water's surface. Somewhere beneath those dark waters lay Madison, silenced forever by a man who had preached about righteousness while harboring the darkest of sins. The truth had finally come to light, but at a terrible cost. The shepherd had betrayed his flock in the most fundamental way, and for Bethany Thompson, nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months after Pastor Daniel Thompson's arrest, the small town of Millfield was still reeling from the scandal that had shaken it to its core. The church, that had once been the center of community life, now stood half empty on Sundays, its congregation fractured by disbelief, anger, and shame. Some blamed the institution itself. Others blamed those who had brought the accusations forward. The case had divided families, ended friendships, and left a wound in the community that would take years to heal. Bethany Thompson sat in the back row of the Millfield County Courthouse, her mother beside her, as her father's trial entered its final phase. The prosecution had presented a devastating case. The physical evidence from the lake house, Madison's recovered body with injuries matching Pastor Thompson's confession, and testimony from both Bethany and Robert Hayes about the events leading to the pastor's arrest. Chief Wilson had been indicted as an accessory after the fact, his career and reputation destroyed by his misguided loyalty to a man who had betrayed every principle he claimed to uphold. Several church elders who had participated in the attempted cover-up were facing charges of their own, though lesser ones than the disgraced police chief. District Attorney Michael Lawson approached the podium for his closing argument, his tall frame commanding attention as he addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 2 weeks, you have heard testimony describing how Daniel Thompson, a man trusted as a spiritual leader, exploited his position to groom and seduce a vulnerable teenager. You've heard how, when faced with exposure, he took Madison Clark's life in a moment of rage and panic. You've heard how he then meticulously covered up his crime, disposing of her body in Crescent Lake, and was willing to silence anyone who threatened to reveal the truth, including his own daughter. Bethany stared straight ahead, unwilling to look at her father seated at the defense table. She had testified earlier in the trial, recounting her suspicions, her investigation, and the final confrontation at the lake house. The defense attorney had tried to paint her as a rebellious teenager with a grudge against her strict father, but the physical evidence and her father's own confession had made such claims ring hollow. The defense would have you believe that Madison's death was an accident, Lawson continued, a momentary lapse in judgment by an otherwise good man. They ask for your mercy, for your understanding of human frailty. But this case is not about a single moment of weakness. It is about a calculated pattern of predatory behavior followed by deliberate actions to conceal a heinous crime. Sarah Thompson reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. The past 3 months had transformed her from the perfect pastor's wife into a woman finding her own strength through unimaginable adversity. She had filed for divorce, sold their family home, and moved with Bethany into a modest apartment across town. She had also started working as an administrative assistant at Millfield Community College, her first job in over 20 years. The evidence before you is clear and incontrovertible, Lawson was saying. Daniel Thompson is guilty of murder in the 1st degree. He had time to reflect on his actions, time to call for help, time to make a different choice. Instead, he chose to end Madison's life and dispose of her body to protect his reputation. Justice demands nothing less than a guilty verdict. As the district attorney returned to his seat, the defense attorney rose for his final appeal to the jury. Martin Green was one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the state, hired by several wealthy church members who still believed in Pastor Thompson's innocence, or at least in his right to the best possible defense. Members of the jury, Green began, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the courtroom, there is no question that Madison Clark's death was a tragedy. There is no question that Daniel Thompson made terrible mistakes, mistakes he has confessed to and for which he has expressed profound remorse. But I urge you to consider the difference between a tragic accident followed by panic and a premeditated murder. Bethany felt a surge of anger as the defense attorney continued to minimize her father's actions, portraying him as a good man who had made one terrible mistake in a moment of fear and confusion. There had been nothing accidental about his relationship with Madison, nothing panicked about the way he had weighted her body and sunk it in the lake, nothing remorseful about his willingness to silence his own daughter to protect his secrets. Daniel Thompson has lost everything already, Green concluded, gesturing toward his client. His career, his reputation, his family. I ask you to judge him not by his worst moment, but by the totality of his life's work, the thousands he has counseled, the community he has served, the family he has loved. Justice must be tempered with mercy. The charge of first-degree murder requires premeditation, a calculated intent to kill. The evidence simply does not support such a finding. As the judge began instructing the jury on their deliberations, Bethany leaned closer to her mother. "Do you think they'll convict him?" she whispered. Sarah's face was grim. "The evidence is overwhelming, but juries can be unpredictable, and your father still has supporters in this town." It was true. Even after everything that had come to light, there were those in Millfield who couldn't reconcile the Pastor Thompson they had known for years with the monster described in court. They spoke of forgiveness, of Christian charity, of allowing God to judge rather than man. Some had even suggested that Madison had seduced him, that a middle-aged man of God had been led astray by a manipulative teenager. Such victim-blaming had only added to the pain of Richard and Patricia Clark, Madison's parents, who sat in the front row of the courtroom, their grief palpable. Bethany had tried to reach out to them after her father's arrest, but the connection between their families had been irreparably broken. Madison's parents couldn't look at Bethany without seeing her father, and Bethany couldn't blame them for it. The jury filed out to begin their deliberations, and the courtroom emptied slowly. As Bethany and her mother made their way toward the exit, they found Robert Hayes waiting for them in the hallway. "How are you holding up?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "As well as can be expected," Sarah replied with a wan smile. "How about you?" Since being cleared of the false charges Chief Wilson had leveled against him, Robert had taken over as interim pastor at Grace Community Church. It was a thankless job, trying to rebuild trust, heal divisions, and guide a broken congregation through the darkest period in its history. "It's challenging," he admitted. "Half the congregation thinks I betrayed Daniel by going to the police. The other half thinks I should have seen what was happening sooner and prevented it." "You did the right thing," Bethany said firmly. "You're the only reason we got justice for Madison." Robert shook his head. "You're the one who refused to look away, Bethany, even when it would have been easier, even when it meant confronting the unthinkable about your own father." A commotion near the courtroom entrance drew their attention. Patricia Clark was being comforted by her husband as she sobbed against his shoulder, overcome by the strain of the trial and the reopening of wounds that had barely begun to heal. "I should talk to them," Bethany said suddenly. "I need to—" "Are you sure that's wise?" Sarah asked gently. "They've made it clear they're not ready to speak with us. I have to try," Bethany insisted. "It might be my last chance before the verdict." Leaving her mother with Robert, Bethany approached the Clarks cautiously. Richard noticed her first, his expression hardening as he recognized the daughter of the man who had murdered his child. "Mr. and Mrs. Clark," Bethany began, her voice small, but determined. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, and I understand. I wanted to tell you how sorry I am. Not just for what my father did, but for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting Madison." Patricia looked up, her tear-stained face a mask of grief and anger. You were her best friend, she said, her voice breaking on the words. How could you not have known? The accusation hit Bethany like a physical blow. I didn't know, she whispered. I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined. If I had known, I would have done anything to save her. Would you? Richard challenged. Would you have turned in your own father? Or would you have protected him like everyone else in that church did? I did turn him in, Bethany reminded them, fighting back tears, as soon as I had proof of what he'd done. After Madison was already dead, Patricia said bitterly, there was nothing Bethany could say to that. Madison was gone, and no amount of justice or apologies would bring her back. The guilt she carried, rational or not, would be with her forever. I understand your anger, she finally said. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I loved Madison, and I will testify against my father every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it takes to keep him in prison for what he did to her. Richard's expression softened slightly at the sincerity in her voice. Your testimony was brave, he conceded. It couldn't have been easy. Nothing about this is easy, Bethany acknowledged, for any of us. A tense silence fell between them, broken finally by Patricia. They found Madison's journal, she said quietly. The police returned it to us after they finished with the evidence. Bethany looked up in surprise. Madison had always kept a journal, writing in it daily since they were in middle school. She had never let anyone read it, not even Bethany. She wrote about your father, Patricia continued, her voice hollow. About how it started during counseling sessions after her anxiety attacks began last year. How he made her feel special, chosen. How he manipulated her into believing they had a unique spiritual connection that justified their relationship. The word came out as if it tasted bitter in her mouth. She was conflicted about it, Richard added. Part of her knew it was wrong, but he had her convinced that God had brought them together, that it was a divine test of some kind. Bethany felt sick. The thought of her father using his position, using faith itself, to manipulate and exploit her friend was almost more than she could bear. The last entry, Patricia said, her voice breaking again, was the day before she disappeared. She wrote that she was going to tell you everything, that she couldn't live with the lies anymore, that she was afraid of what would happen, but she trusted you would understand and help her. The words were like knives in Bethany's heart. Madison had trusted her, had been counting on her, and she had failed her friend in the most fundamental way. I wish she had told me sooner, Bethany whispered. I wish I could have helped her. So do we, Richard said simply. Before anything more could be said, a court officer appeared in the hallway. The jury's coming back, he announced. They've reached a verdict. The speed of the decision, less than 2 hours of deliberation, sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered crowd. Quick verdicts usually favored the prosecution, but in a case as emotional and high-profile as this one, nothing could be taken for granted. As everyone filed back into the courtroom, Bethany found herself walking beside Patricia Clark. Impulsively, she reached out and touched the older woman's arm. No matter what happens in there, she said softly, I will never stop being sorry, and I will never stop trying to make it right. Patricia didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. It was the smallest of openings, but in that moment, it felt like the first fragile possibility of healing. The courtroom fell silent as the jury entered and took their seats. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to Judge Marshall. The judge read it silently, his expression giving nothing away, then returned it to the bailiff. Has the jury reached a verdict? He asked formally. We have. Your Honor, the foreman replied, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? A pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. We find the defendant guilty, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of reactions, gasps, sobs, murmured prayers, and scattered applause quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Daniel Thompson showed no reaction, his face a mask of resignation. His attorney immediately began, making notes, presumably preparing for an appeal. Bethany felt a complex wave of emotions, relief that justice had been served, grief for all that had been lost, and a strange emptiness where closure should have been. The verdict wouldn't bring Madison back. It wouldn't heal the divisions in the community. It wouldn't erase the betrayal of a father who had chosen his reputation over his own daughter's safety. Judge Marshall scheduled the sentencing hearing. For 2 weeks later, then adjourned the court. As the bailiff led Daniel Thompson away, he turned briefly, his eyes finding Bethany in the crowd. For a moment, father and daughter looked at each other across a gulf wider than the physical distance between them. Then he was gone, escorted through a side door to return to the county jail where he would await sentencing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around the key figures in the case. The district attorney declaring victory for justice, the defense attorney promising an appeal, Robert speaking briefly about the need for healing and reconciliation in the community. Bethany and her mother slipped away quietly, avoiding the cameras and questions. That evening, as they sat in their apartment sharing a simple dinner, Sarah broke the silence that had fallen between them. "I received a letter from Harvard today," she said. "They've reinstated your admission for the spring semester, if you still want to go." Bethany looked up in surprise. In the chaos following Madison's disappearance and her father's arrest, she had withdrawn her college applications. Unable to think beyond the immediate crisis, she had assumed those opportunities were lost. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "to leave Millfield, to start over somewhere new." "You don't have to decide right away," Sarah assured her. "But I don't want you to put your life on hold because of what happened." Madison wouldn't have wanted that. The mention of Madison's name sent a pang through Bethany's heart. "I keep thinking about what Mrs. Clark said, about Madison's journal, about how she trusted me to help her." "You did help her," Sarah said firmly. "You brought her killer to justice. You made sure she wasn't forgotten." But it wasn't enough. I was too late. Sarah reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. We were all too late, all of us who looked the other way, who didn't want to see the signs. Me most of all. I was his wife, Bethany. I lived with him for 20 years. If anyone should have seen what he was capable of, it was me. The shared guilt between them had become a fragile bond, replacing the family they had lost. In their grief and regret, they had found a new honesty with each other, a relationship built on truth rather than the perfect facade they had maintained for so long. The following Sunday, Bethany made a difficult decision. Despite her complicated feelings about the church, she felt drawn to attend the service at Grace Community. She needed to face the community, to be part of whatever healing might be possible. The sanctuary was only half full when she slipped into a back pew. Some of the congregation greeted her warmly, others deliberately looked away. She was both a victim and reminder of their collective failure. The daughter who had exposed the sins they had all enabled through their unquestioning trust and willful blindness. Robert's sermon that day was about restoration, not about returning to what was, but about building something new and better from the broken pieces. He spoke of truth as the foundation of faith, of the courage required to confront wrongdoing even within sacred spaces, and of a God who demanded justice as much as mercy. "Our church has been damaged in ways that cannot be easily repaired," he acknowledged. "Trust has been broken, faith has been tested. Some of us have left, unable to reconcile what happened here with their belief in a loving God. Others have stayed, determined to rebuild something worthy of that belief. Both responses are valid. Both paths require courage." After the service, several congregation members approached Bethany, offering awkward but sincere expressions of support. Others kept their distance, still uncertain how to relate to the daughter of the man who had been their spiritual leader for so long. As the crowd thinned, Bethany noticed a familiar figure standing near the memorial table that had been set up. At the back of the sanctuary, a display of photos of Madison, along with candles and flowers. Patricia Clark stood alone, gazing at a portrait of her daughter in her junior prom dress, her auburn hair styled elegantly, her smile radiant. Hesitantly, Bethany approached, unsure of her welcome after their tense exchange at the courthouse. "Mrs. Clark," she said softly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Patricia turned, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I didn't expect to come," she admitted. "But this morning I felt, I don't know, like Madison would have wanted me to see this place one more time, to reclaim it somehow." Bethany nodded, understanding the complex pull of a place that held both precious and painful memories. "I brought something for you," Patricia said, reaching into her purse. She withdrew a small, leather-bound book with a worn cover, Madison's journal. "I think you should read it." Bethany stared at the journal in shock. "I couldn't," she protested. "That's Madison's private thoughts." "She would have wanted you to understand," Patricia insisted. "Not everything. There are pages I've removed that no one else needs to see. But the rest, I think it might help you find some peace." "Help us both, maybe." With trembling hands, Bethany accepted the journal. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." Patricia nodded, then hesitated. "Richard and I are moving next month to Arizona. His company has a position there, and we need a fresh start, somewhere without memories on every street corner." "I understand," Bethany said, though the news brought a fresh wave of sadness. Another piece of Madison, her parents, her home, would be gone from Millfield. "We'll keep in touch," Patricia said, though both women knew it was unlikely. The connection between them was too painful, too fraught with complicated emotions, to sustain a relationship. "Let me know what you decide about Harvard." Bethany blinked in surprise. "How did you know about that?" A ghost of a smile touched Patricia's lips. "Madison told me, last spring, when you got your acceptance letters. She was so proud of you, said her best friend was going to change the world someday." The words were a gift and a burden both, a reminder of Madison's belief in her and of the responsibility that came with surviving when her friend had not. That night, alone in her room, Bethany finally opened Madison's journal. The entries began over a year earlier, chronicles of normal teenage life, school stress, family dynamics, dreams for the future. Then came the first mentions of increased anxiety after Madison's parents began having marital problems, leading to counseling sessions with Pastor Thompson. The evolution was subtle but clear, how the counseling sessions became longer, more personal, how Pastor Thompson made Madison feel understood and valued in ways she hadn't before, how he gradually introduced physical contact, a comforting hand on her shoulder, becoming a lingering touch on her arm, then more. June 15th. Pastor. T says our connection is special, that God has brought us together for a purpose. When I'm with him, I feel like I matter in a way I never have before, but sometimes afterward I feel so confused and guilty. I know what we're doing is wrong, but he makes it seem like it's part of some greater plan. Bethany's stomach churned as she read her father's manipulation of Madison's faith and vulnerability, the classic grooming techniques disguised as spiritual guidance. How had no one seen it happening? How had she, Madison's closest friend, missed the signs? The entries became more troubled as the relationship progressed, Madison's initial exhilaration giving way to doubt, guilt, and fear. August 30th. I almost told Bethany today. We were studying together, and she asked why I've been so distant lately. The words were right there on my tongue, but I couldn't say them. How do you tell your best friend that you're involved with her father, that you've betrayed her in the worst possible way? She'd never forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. The pain of realizing how isolated Madison had felt, trapped in a relationship she increasingly recognized as wrong but felt unable to escape, was almost unbearable. Bethany had to set the journal aside several times, overcome by grief and anger. The final entry, dated the day before Madison's disappearance, confirmed what Patricia had told her at the courthouse. October 12th. I can't do this anymore. The lying, the sneaking around, the guilt, it's eating me alive. And now I might be pregnant. I took a test yesterday and it was positive, though sometimes those early results are wrong. I'm terrified. But I've decided I'm going to tell Bethany everything tomorrow. She'll be hurt and angry, and she might hate me forever, but she deserves to know the truth. And if anyone can help me find a way out of this mess, it's her. She's the strongest, most honest person I know. I'm so scared of what's coming. But for the first time in months, I feel like I'm making the right choice. The truth has to be better than living like this, doesn't it? The words blurred as tears filled Bethany's eyes. Madison had trusted her and had been counting on her strength and honesty at the end. And though it had come too late to save her friend, Bethany had ultimately lived up to that trust, refusing to look away from the truth, no matter how painful, and ensuring that justice was served. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But as she closed the journal, Bethany felt something shift inside her. Not closure exactly, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it. Madison's voice, preserved in these pages, had given her a gift. The knowledge that even in her darkest moments, her friend had believed in her. 2 days later, Bethany called the admissions office at Harvard and accepted their offer for the spring semester. She would never forget what had happened in Millfield, never stop regretting the signs she had missed or the intervention that came too late. But she could honor Madison's memory by living the life her friend had believed she was capable of. One built on truth, courage, and the determination to protect others from the kind of predator her father had been. As winter settled over Millfield, bringing snow that covered the scars of the previous months with a temporary blanket of pristine white, Bethany began packing for her new beginning. Madison's journal sat on her nightstand, a reminder of the price of silence and the power of truth. Whatever came next, she would carry its lessons with her always. The final chapter of the tragedy that had shaken Millfield to its core would be written not in courtrooms or church sanctuaries, but in the lives of those who had survived it, in their choices, their healing, and their commitment to ensuring that such betrayal could never again hide behind a facade of righteousness. For Bethany Thompson, daughter of the fallen shepherd, that commitment began with a single step away from the past and toward the future that Madison had always believed she deserved. The Harvard campus was ablaze with autumn colors as Bethany Thompson walked the familiar path from Widener Library to her apartment just off campus. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had been hard-won through years of healing and self-discovery. Her blonde hair was shorter now, cut in a practical bob that framed a face that had matured from pretty to striking, though few would describe her as carefree. She checked her watch, nearly 5, and she was due to meet Professor Abigail Martinez at 6 to discuss her graduate school application. After completing her undergraduate degree in psychology with a focus on trauma and recovery, Bethany had decided to pursue a master's in clinical social work. Her personal experience had shaped her academic path in ways she never could have anticipated when she first set foot on campus 5 years earlier. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Call when you can. Good news from the foundation." Bethany smiled. Sarah Thompson had transformed her life in ways that still sometimes amazed her daughter. After the trial and her divorce from Daniel, Sarah had used her settlement to establish the Madison Clark Foundation, dedicated to educating communities about predatory behavior in trusted institutions and supporting victims of abuse. What had begun as a small local initiative had grown into a respected organization with programs in schools and churches across 3 states. Finding a quiet bench beneath a brilliant red maple tree, Bethany called her mother. "Hey, Mom. What's the good news? We got the grant." Sarah's voice carried an enthusiasm that had once been foreign to her. "The Department of Education approved our funding request for the high school program. We can expand to 20 more schools next year." "That's fantastic," Bethany replied warmly. "All your hard work is paying off." "Our hard work," Sarah corrected. "Your research on warning signs and intervention strategies was key to the proposal." It was true. Bethany had channeled her guilt and grief into studying how predators like her father operated in positions of trust, identifying patterns that often went unrecognized until it was too late. Her undergraduate thesis on institutional protections for vulnerable youth had already been cited in several academic publications and policy papers. "How are you feeling about the interview tonight?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "Nervous," Bethany admitted. "Professor Martinez is brilliant, and the program is incredibly competitive. She requested you specifically as her advisor, didn't she? That's a good sign." "I know. Sometimes I still wonder if I'm doing this for the right reasons, if I'm trying to fix the past instead of building a future." Sarah's voice softened. "The best healers are often those who understand wounds from the inside, honey. Your experience gives you insight that can't be taught in any classroom." After chatting a few minutes more about Sarah's upcoming speaking engagement and her recent dinner with Robert Hayes and his new wife, they said their goodbyes. Bethany sat for a moment longer on the bench, watching students crisscross the yard, their lives untouched by the kind of trauma that had altered her own trajectory so dramatically. Her phone buzzed again, this time an email notification from a name that still caused her heart to skip. Patricia Clark. Madison's mother had kept in sporadic contact over the years, first through brief, formal updates about their life in Arizona, then gradually more personal exchanges. The relationship remained complicated, laden with shared grief and unspoken guilt, but it had evolved into something meaningful for both women. The email was brief but significant. "Bethany, Richard and I will be in Boston next weekend for a medical conference. If you're free, we'd like to see you. There's something important we want to discuss in person." Bethany's mind raced with possibilities. She hadn't seen the Clarks in over 3 years, not since they had made a detour to Millfield for the dedication of a memorial garden for Madison at the town park. What could be so important that Patricia wanted to discuss it face to face? She typed a quick reply, suggesting dinner on Saturday evening, then headed back to her apartment to prepare for her meeting with Professor Martinez. The following Saturday, Bethany arrived at an upscale restaurant near Boston Harbor, 15 minutes. Early, her nerves jangling, she had dressed carefully in a simple navy dress that projected the professional confidence she was still learning to feel. The maitre d' led her to a table where Richard and Patricia Clark were already seated. The years had been kind to neither of them. Richard's once dark hair was now predominantly grey, and deep lines etched his face around eyes that had never fully lost their sorrow. Patricia was thinner than Bethany remembered, her elegant posture now bearing a brittleness that spoke of enduring rather than thriving. Yet they greeted her warmly, Patricia rising to embrace Bethany with genuine affection. "It's good to see you," she said, studying Bethany's face. "You look well, happy even." "I'm getting there," Bethany replied honestly. "How have you been?" Small talk carried them through the appetizers, updates on Richard's cardiology practice, Patricia's volunteer work with grieving parents, Bethany's graduate school plans. But an underlying tension suggested that the real purpose of the meeting remained unaddressed. Finally, after their entrees arrived, Richard set down his fork and exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife. "We have news," he said, his voice deliberately measured. "Your father is being considered for parole." The words hit Bethany like a physical blow. "What? How is that possible? He was sentenced to 25 years. Overcrowding, good behavior, participation in rehabilitation. Programs," Patricia explained, her tone bitter. "His attorney has filed a petition claiming he's been fully rehabilitated and poses no threat to society." "That's absurd," Bethany whispered, her appetite vanishing. "It's only been 5 years." "The hearing is next month," Richard continued. "The parole board will consider victim impact statements. We're going to testify, of course, but they've contacted us about you," Patricia finished. "They want to know if you would be willing to speak at the hearing. As his daughter, your statement would carry significant weight." Bethany's mind reeled with the implications. She had worked hard to compartmentalize her father's crime, to build a life that wasn't defined solely by that trauma. She had not spoken to him since the trial, had not responded to his letters from prison, had deliberately avoided news about his incarceration. "I don't know if I can face him," she admitted, her voice small. Patricia reached across the table to touch Bethany's hand. "We understand if you can't, but we wanted to ask in person, not over the phone or in an email. This affects you too." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of discussion about the legal process, the likelihood of the parole being granted, disturbingly high according to the district attorney, and what it might mean for all of them if Daniel Thompson returned to society. Back in her apartment that night, Bethany pulled out the journal she had kept since leaving Millfield, her own record of healing, inspired by Madison's honesty in documenting her experiences. She wrote about the dinner, about the shock of hearing her father might be released, about the competing emotions of fear, anger, and a complicated grief for the father she had once adored. After setting aside her journal, she reached for the other one, Madison's, which she had kept all these years. Opening to a random page, she read, "February 12th, Pastor T says that forgiveness is the highest form of love. That God calls us to forgive those who harm us. But what about those who harm others? Is it still our place to forgive them? I don't know if I could forgive someone who hurt Bethany, even if God expected me to." The passage, read so many times before, struck her differently now. What would Madison want her to do about her father's potential release? Would she want Bethany to fight it with everything she had, or would she understand the exhaustion that came with carrying anger for so long? Bethany slept fitfully that night, her dreams populated by fragments of the past. Madison's laugh during their last summer together, her father's face as he was led away in handcuffs, the cold waters of Crescent Lake where Madison's body had lain hidden. The next morning, she called her mother. "Did you know?" she asked without preamble. Sarah's sigh confirmed she did. "Yes, I got the notification last week. I was trying to figure out how to tell you." "Why didn't you warn me before the Clarks did?" "I'm sorry, honey. I don't know what I thought. That we could fight it quietly, maybe. That you wouldn't have to be involved." "Of course I'm involved," Bethany said, frustration edging her voice. "He's my father, and Madison was my best friend. I can't just pretend this isn't happening." "I know," Sarah conceded. "What are you thinking of doing?" "I don't know yet. But I think I need to go back to Millfield to see the place again before I decide." There was a long pause before Sarah responded. "Would you like me to come with you?" Bethany considered the offer. Her mother had visited her regularly in Boston, but she hadn't returned to Millfield since selling their home 5 years earlier. Sarah had rebuilt her life elsewhere, deliberately distancing herself from the community that now associated her. only with scandal and tragedy. No, Bethany decided. This is something I need to do alone. 2 days later, Bethany took a leave of absence from her research assistant position and boarded a flight to her home state. She had arranged to stay with the only person in Millfield she still kept in regular contact with, Robert Hayes, who had remained at Grace Community Church and slowly, painfully rebuilt its congregation around principles of transparency, accountability, and genuine faith rather than performative righteousness. As her rental car crested the hill that overlooked Millfield, Bethany was struck by how little the town had changed visually. The same neat grid of streets, the central square with its gazebo and cherry trees, the church steeple still the highest point on the skyline. Yet she knew that beneath the picturesque surface, much had changed. Some wounds had healed, others had been covered over but remained tender to the touch. Robert and his wife Emma welcomed Bethany warmly to their modest home a few blocks from the church. Emma, a trauma counselor who had helped many in the congregation process the betrayal of their former pastor, embraced Bethany with genuine affection. "We've set up the guest room for you," she said, leading Bethany down a hallway decorated with simple landscapes and family photos. "Stay as long as you need. Thank you. It should just be a few days. I need to, I don't know, make peace with this place somehow before I can decide what to do about the parole hearing." Emma nodded, understanding. "Sometimes we need to physically return to the site of our trauma to realize it no longer has power over us." That evening over dinner, Robert updated Bethany on the changes in Millfield since her last visit. The church had slowly regained trust, though its congregation was smaller, more humble in its aspirations. Many of the elders who had been complicit in the attempted cover-up had left, replaced by a more diverse leadership council that included women and younger members. "What about Chief Wilson?" Bethany asked. "Did he serve his sentence?" Robert nodded. 18 months. He's out now, living with his daughter in Colorado. Most of the others involved got probation or suspended sentences." "And the Millfield Coffee Company?" Bethany asked, remembering the cafe where she had waited while Robert confronted her father. "Is it still there?" "Under new management, but yes. The whole town center is pretty much the same. Cornerstone Cafe, Miller's Hardware, all the landmarks. And the lake house? What happened to it?" Robert and Emma exchanged a glance. "The church sold it," Robert explained. "Too many bad memories. It's a private residence now. The new owners renovated it completely. I doubt you'd recognize it." The following morning, Bethany set out alone to revisit the places that had featured so prominently in the darkest chapter of her life. She began with the church, arriving during a quiet weekday when no services were scheduled. Robert had given her a key, understanding her need to confront this space on her own terms. The sanctuary was smaller than she remembered, the light through the stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across pews that had once been filled with people who respected and admired her father. She walked slowly to the pulpit where he had preached about morality while living a lie, then to the third row where she and Madison had sat side by side, Sunday after Sunday. A wave of memories washed over her. Madison passing her notes during particularly boring sermons, both of them trying not to giggle, the two of them singing in the youth choir at Christmas, Madison confiding her anxiety about her parents' marriage after a service. Had the signs of her friend's deepening trouble been there all along? Could Bethany have recognized them if she'd been more attentive, less absorbed in her own college plans and teenage concerns? From the church, she drove to her old home on Maple Street. New owners had painted it a different color and landscaped. The yard with native plants, rather than the formal garden her mother had maintained. She sat in her car across the street, remembering the night she had followed her father to the lake house, the beginning of the end of everything she had thought. She knew about her family and her world. The Cornerstone Cafe was her next stop. She ordered coffee and sat at the same window table where she had waited for news from Robert 5 years earlier. Marge, the waitress who had served her then, was nowhere to be seen, replaced by younger staff who wouldn't recognize Bethany or know her connection to the scandal that had rocked their town. As she sipped her coffee, a familiar figure entered the cafe, Eleanor Winters, the elderly widow who had once praised her father's sermons. Now well into her 80s, she moved slowly with the aid of a walker. She ordered tea at the counter, then turned and spotted Bethany by the window. For a moment, Bethany feared rejection or condemnation. But Eleanor's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Bethany Thompson, is that really you?" "Yes, Mrs. Winters, it's me. May I join you? These old legs don't like to stand for long." Bethany gestured to the empty chair across from her, curious about what this woman, once a devoted member of her father's congregation, might have to say to her now. "You look wonderful, dear," Eleanor said as she settled herself. "College agrees with you." "Thank you. How have you been?" "Oh, getting by. These bones aren't what they used to be, but the Lord keeps me going." Her eyes, bright with intelligence despite her age, studied Bethany's face. "We've missed you around here, though I understand why you stayed away." "It's complicated coming back," Bethany acknowledged. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine so, after everything that happened." She sipped her tea before continuing. "You know, I think about Madison often, such a lovely girl, and about you carrying such a burden so young." "Thank you for saying that," Bethany said, touched by the old woman's compassion. "I want you to know," Eleanor continued, her voice lowering slightly, "many of us failed you both. We saw what we wanted to see in your father. We put him on a pedestal. He never should have been on. And when things went wrong, too many looked for someone else to blame." The simple acknowledgement of collective responsibility brought unexpected tears to Bethany's eyes. "That means a lot, Mrs. Winters. The church is different now," Eleanor said. "Pastor Hayes has helped us understand that faith isn't about following a charismatic leader or maintaining appearances. It's about truth and compassion, even when those are difficult." "He's a good man," Bethany agreed. "One of the few who stood up when it mattered." "Like you did," Eleanor pointed out. "That took extraordinary courage." After Eleanor left, Bethany sat for a long time, considering the unexpected encounter. She had come to Millfield prepared to face hostility or awkward avoidance. Instead, she had found acknowledgement and even appreciation for the painful role she had played in exposing the truth. Her final stop was the most difficult: Crescent Lake. She parked at the public access point rather than attempting to visit the private lake house. The autumn afternoon was cool, the lake's surface rippled by a gentle breeze, sunlight dancing across the water that had concealed Madison's body for those terrible days. Bethany walked out onto the public dock, remembering the police boats with their searchlights scanning the depths. The divers, who had finally located and retrieved Madison's weighted down remains. The lake had given up its secret, but the ripples from that discovery continued to spread through all their lives. As she stood gazing out across the water, Bethany felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This place, which had featured in her nightmares for years, was just a lake, beautiful, indifferent to human tragedy, neither malevolent nor magical. The power it had held over her imagination began to dissipate as she saw it for what it was. Her phone rang, breaking the moment of reflection. It was her mother. "How are you doing?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "Better than I expected," Bethany replied honestly. "Being here, it's not as hard as I thought it would be. Everything seems smaller somehow." "Have you decided?" "About the hearing?" Bethany took a deep breath, watching a flock of geese land on the far side of the lake. "Yes, I'm going to testify, not out of vengeance or anger, but because the truth still matters, just like it did 5 years ago." "Are you sure?" "Seeing him again will be difficult," Bethany acknowledged. "But I'm not the same scared teenager who followed her father to this lake that night. I'm stronger now, and I owe it to Madison to make sure he serves his full sentence." That night, back at Robert and Emma's house, Bethany wrote 2 important letters. The first was to the parole board, formally requesting to speak at her father's hearing and outlining her opposition to his early release. The second was to her father himself, the first communication she had initiated with him since his arrest. "Dad, I've learned of your parole hearing next month. I want you to know that I will be there, and I will be asking the board to deny your request, not out of hatred or a desire for revenge, but because I believe justice for Madison requires you to serve your full sentence. I've spent 5 years trying to understand how the father I loved could have done what you did. I've studied psychology, trauma, and moral development. I've read about cognitive dissonance and compartmentalization. I've learned about how power corrupts and how good people can justify terrible actions. None of it has made what you did comprehensible to me. None of it has made Madison any less dead or healed the wound her absence left in all our lives. I don't know if you've changed in prison. I don't know if the rehabilitation programs you've completed have helped you understand the gravity of your crimes or develop genuine remorse. Perhaps they have. But 5 years is not enough time to pay for taking a young life, betraying your family, and abusing the trust of an entire community. If you are truly repentant, you will accept this consequence with grace and continue your rehabilitation without seeking early release. If you are not, then you definitely should not be paroled. This will likely be my only communication with you. I am building a life focused on helping others recognize and prevent the kind of abuse you perpetrated. I am working to honor Madison's memory by protecting others like her. I'm moving forward. I hope someday you can truly understand the damage you've caused and find whatever redemption is possible. But that redemption should not include freedom. Not yet. Bethany, she sealed both letters, knowing that her return to Millfield had given her what she needed, not closure, which she had come to understand was an elusive and perhaps impossible goal, but clarity. The past could not be changed, but it could be faced honestly. The truth could not bring Madison back, but it could prevent other predators from claiming other victims. As she prepared for bed, Bethany took out Madison's journal one last time. She had brought it with her, feeling somehow that Madison should accompany her on this journey back to the place where their paths had diverged so tragically. She turned to the final entry, the one written the day before Madison's death, and read again her friend's words about truth and trust. "The truth has to be better than living like this, doesn't it?" Madison had written. "Yes," Bethany whispered to the friend she had lost but never forgotten. "It is, I promise you. It is." The next morning, she mailed both letters and began the drive back to Boston, leaving Millfield behind once more, not as a place of unprocessed trauma, but as a chapter in her life that had shaped but would not define her. The road ahead was long, with the parole hearing and graduate school and whatever challenges life would bring. But Bethany Thompson drove forward with a certainty that had been hard-won. The shepherd's sin had not destroyed the flock. Survivors survived. Truth prevailed. And life, however altered by tragedy, continued its inexorable forward movement. The Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction loomed gray and imposing against the overcast October sky. Bethany sat in her car in the visitors' parking lot, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The parole hearing was scheduled to begin in 45 minutes, and though she had prepared meticulously, writing and rewriting her statement, rehearsing it with her therapist, even practicing in front of a mirror, She still felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of seeing her father face to face for the first time in 5 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "We just arrived, meeting the Clarks at the entrance." Sarah had flown in from Tennessee the previous evening, staying at Bethany's apartment. Their relationship had deepened over the years, evolving from the formal, somewhat distant dynamic of their life in Millfield to a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared purpose. While Bethany focused on research and clinical training, Sarah had become the public face of their advocacy work, speaking at conferences and training sessions across the country. "On my way," Bethany texted back, gathering her portfolio containing her prepared statement and several letters of support from professionals who believed Daniel Thompson's release would be premature. The entrance to the administrative building, where the hearing would take place, was crowded with more people than Bethany had expected. In addition to her mother and the Clarks, she recognized several faces from Millfield: Robert Hayes and his wife Emma, 2 former church elders who had been particularly supportive after the truth came to light, and even Detective Laura Rodriguez, who had made the arrest all those years ago. What surprised her more was the group standing on the opposite side of the entrance, a small contingent of her father's supporters, including his defense attorney, Martin Green, and 3 people Bethany recognized from Grace Community Church. They had been among the most vocal defenders of her father throughout the trial, insisting that Madison's death had been an accident and that the persecution of Pastor Thompson was unjust. "Vultures!" Richard Clark muttered, glaring at the group. The years had not softened his anger, though he had channeled it into advocacy work alongside his wife, establishing a scholarship in Madison's name for students pursuing counseling careers. Patricia squeezed his arm. "They're not worth it, Richard. We're here for Madison." She turned to Bethany, embracing her warmly. "Thank you for doing this. I know how difficult it must be." Bethany returned the embrace, drawing strength from the woman who had lost so much, yet had found the courage to transform her grief into purpose. "Some things are worth doing precisely because they're difficult," she replied. Inside, they were directed to a conference room where the parole board would convene. 5 members sat at a raised table at the front, reviewing documents and speaking in hushed tones. The room was arranged with tables for the inmate and his representation on one side and those speaking against parole on the other. Rows of chairs behind them accommodated observers and additional witnesses. As they took their seats, the door at the side of the room opened, and Daniel Thompson entered, escorted by a corrections officer. Bethany's breath caught in her throat. The father she remembered, commanding, charismatic, impeccably groomed, had been replaced by a man who looked every day of his 50 years and more. His hair had gone completely grey, his posture slightly stupid, the prison jumpsuit hanging loosely on a frame that had once filled out tailored suits with confident authority. Their eyes met across the room, and Bethany was surprised by what she saw: not the defiance or manipulation she had feared, but something more complex: recognition, regret, and a sadness that seemed genuine, if still tinged with self-pity. She maintained eye contact for a moment, then deliberately looked away, refusing to be drawn into the emotional manipulation that had been his specialty. The hearing began with formal introductions and an explanation of the process. Martin Green presented the case for parole, emphasizing Daniel's exemplary behavior in prison, his completion of rehabilitation programs, his work as a tutor for other inmates, and letters of support from prison chaplains and counselors who believed he had shown genuine remorse. Daniel Thompson has used his time in prison for profound self-examination and growth, Green argued. He has taken full responsibility for his actions and understands the grave harm he caused. He poses no threat to society and has a support network ready to help him reintegrate as a productive member of the community. Green then called several character witnesses, including a prison chaplain who spoke of Daniel's spiritual journey behind bars and a former church member who offered to employ him upon release. Each testimony painted a picture of a man transformed by guilt and faith, worthy of a second chance. When it was time for those opposing parole to speak, District Attorney Michael Lawson, who had prosecuted the original case, presented first. Members of the board, releasing Daniel Thompson after serving just 5 years of a 25-year sentence, would make a mockery of justice, he began firmly. This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. Mr. Thompson systematically groomed a vulnerable teenage girl, abused his position of trust, and when she threatened to expose him, he took her life. He then engaged in an elaborate cover-up that included attempting to silence his own daughter when she discovered the truth. Lawson presented statistics on recidivism rates for violent offenders and cited psychological assessments questioning whether 5 years was sufficient time for genuine rehabilitation in cases involving such profound betrayal of trust and moral authority. Patricia Clark spoke next, her voice steady, despite the emotion evident in her eyes. She held a framed photograph of Madison. Not a childhood picture, but one taken just months before her death, capturing her on the cusp of adulthood, full of promise and possibility. "This is who Daniel Thompson killed," she said simply. "Not just our daughter, but all she would have become. The college student, the woman, the professional, the potential mother and friend and community member." Madison would be 23, now the same age Bethany is. She might have been finishing graduate school, starting her career, falling in love. Instead, she lies in a cemetery, and we are left with memories and photographs. Patricia described the crushing impact of Madison's death on their family. Richard's heart attack the year after the trial, which his doctors attributed to prolonged stress, her own battle with depression, the holidays and birthdays marked by absence rather than celebration. 5 years is nothing compared to the lifetime we've lost, she concluded. Madison deserves better than to have her killer walk free while we're still learning how to live without her. Richard spoke briefly, his testimony more focused on the calculated nature of Daniel's actions after Madison's death. The deliberate disposal of her body, the lies to investigators, the willingness to destroy his own daughter to protect himself. This was not a man caught in a moment of passion, he emphasized. This was a man who made choice after choice to protect himself rather than take responsibility. Has 5 years really changed that fundamental character? When Bethany's turn came, she approached the podium with a calm she didn't entirely feel. She had dressed simply but professionally in a charcoal grey suit, her blonde hair pulled back, Madison's silver bracelet recovered as evidence and later returned to the Clarks, who had given it to Bethany, visible on her wrist. "My name is Bethany Thompson," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I'm the daughter of Daniel Thompson, and I'm here to oppose his parole." She felt her father's eyes on her, but did not look at him, focusing instead on the board members who were watching her with evident interest. The daughter of the inmate testifying against his release was unusual, and she knew her words would carry particular weight. 5 years ago, my father murdered my best friend to conceal their inappropriate relationship and then attempted to silence me when I discovered evidence of his crime. These are the established facts, proven in court, and acknowledged in his eventual confession. What the board must consider today is not whether these events occurred, they did, but whether sufficient time has passed and sufficient rehabilitation has occurred to justify early release. Bethany outlined her educational background and current studies, establishing her understanding of trauma psychology and rehabilitation processes. Based on both my professional training and my personal experience with the inmate, I believe strongly that 5 years is inadequate time to address the profound moral failures that led to Madison Clark's death. My father's crimes involved not Just a single act of violence, but years of calculated grooming, exploitation of trust, and abuse of power. These patterns of behavior are deeply ingrained and require extensive intervention and time to meaningfully change. She described how her father's actions had devastated multiple lives, not just Madison's, but her own, her mother's, the Clarks, and the entire community that had trusted him. The ripple effects of his crimes continue to this day. 5 years of imprisonment, even with exemplary behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs, cannot balance the scales of justice for a life taken and countless others damaged. As she concluded her testimony, Bethany finally allowed herself to look directly at her father. If Daniel Thompson is truly remorseful, if he has genuinely changed as his supporters claim, then he will accept the consequences of his actions with humility and continue his rehabilitation process for the full term of his sentence. Early release would undermine the seriousness of his crimes and fail to provide the justice Madison deserves. The parole board asked several questions about her relationship with her father before and after the crime, whether she had visited him in prison, she had not, and if she believed rehabilitation was possible at all. Bethany answered thoughtfully, emphasizing that she believed in the possibility of human change, but not in shortcuts to redemption. When all scheduled testimonies were complete, the board granted Daniel Thompson an opportunity to address the room. He rose slowly, his movements those of a man who had aged beyond his years in the confines of incarceration. "I want to thank the board for considering my case," he began, his voice lacking the resonant authority that had once captivated congregations. "And I want to thank those who spoke today, both for and against my release, for their honesty." He turned slightly to face the side of the room where Bethany sat with her mother and the Clarks. "I particularly want to thank my daughter, Bethany. Your courage and integrity humble me. You have become the moral compass I failed to be." Bethany maintained a neutral expression, unwilling to give him the emotional response he might be seeking. "I won't stand here and ask for forgiveness," he continued. "I know that what I did is unforgivable. I took a precious life. I betrayed every principle I claimed to uphold. I hurt those closest to me in ways that can never be fully healed." His voice broke slightly, but he composed himself. "The rehabilitation programs I've completed have helped me understand the patterns of self-deception and entitlement that led to my crimes. They've helped me see how I used my position and Madison's vulnerability to justify the unjustifiable. They've helped me recognize the man I became and the man I hope to be, whether inside these walls or someday beyond them." He turned back to the parole board. "Whatever your decision today, I accept it. If you determine that more time is needed, I will continue the work of rehabilitation. If you grant parole, I will dedicate whatever years remain to me to making some small amends for the incalculable harm I've caused." The hearing concluded with procedural details. The board would deliberate and announce their decision within 5 business days. As the room began to clear, Daniel was escorted back toward the door through which he had entered. He paused briefly, looking over his shoulder at Bethany. Their eyes met once more, and he gave a small, sad nod before disappearing through the door. Outside the facility, the small group who had spoken against parole gathered briefly before dispersing. Detective Rodriguez approached Bethany with an unexpected update. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "We reopened the investigation into other potential victims after your father's conviction. 2 women have come forward with accounts of inappropriate behavior during counseling sessions when they were teenagers. The statute of limitations has expired for any charges, but it confirms the pattern of predatory behavior you described in your testimony." The information hit Bethany like a physical blow, confirmation of her worst fears, that Madison had not been her father's only victim, just the only one whose resistance had ended in tragedy. She thanked the detective for the information, knowing it would strengthen the case against parole, even as it reopened wounds she had worked hard to heal. Patricia noticed Bethany's distress and drew her aside. "What did she tell you?" When Bethany relayed the information, Patricia closed her eyes briefly. "I suspected as much. Madison's journal had hints, references to things your father said that suggested experience with similar situations." "I should have seen it," Bethany whispered, the familiar guilt resurfacing. "All those years under our own roof." "No," Patricia said firmly, taking Bethany's hands in hers. "You were a child yourself. The adults in your community, teachers, other church leaders, parents, we were the ones who should have recognized the signs. You've taken on enough responsibility that was never yours to carry." Later that evening, Bethany, Sarah, and the Clarks shared a quiet dinner at a restaurant near Bethany's apartment. Their conversation intentionally avoided the hearing, focusing instead on their current lives, Bethany's graduate studies, Sarah's foundation work, the Clarks' recent move to a smaller home as they began contemplating retirement. As they parted for the evening, Richard embraced Bethany with uncharacteristic emotion. "Madison would be proud of you," he said gruffly, "of the woman you've become." The words stayed with Bethany as she lay awake that night, thinking about the parallel lives that might have been, she and Madison navigating college together, supporting each other through early adulthood, perhaps even working side by side in careers that helped others. The path not taken, erased by one man's selfish choices. 5 days later, Bethany received the call she had been waiting for. The parole board had reached their decision. Daniel Thompson's request for early release had been denied. He would be eligible to apply again in 3 years, but for now, justice had been served. She shared the news with her mother and the Clarks, all of them experiencing the complex mixture of relief and renewed grief that seemed to accompany every milestone. In their shared journey, there was no celebration, no sense of victory, just the quiet acknowledgement that a necessary battle had been won. That evening, Bethany walked across Harvard Yard as the autumn sun set behind the historic buildings. Students streamed past, her engrossed in their own lives and concerns, unaware of the weight she had carried and partially set down that day. She found herself outside Memorial Church, its white spire reaching toward the darkening sky. Though she had largely distanced herself from organized religion after her father's crimes, she felt drawn to enter the quiet sanctuary. Sitting alone in a back pew, Bethany reflected on the long journey from that night at Crescent Lake to this moment of tentative peace. The shepherd had sinned, and the consequences had altered countless lives forever. But in the aftermath, something resilient had emerged, not just survival, but a determination to transform trauma into purpose, to use the hard-won wisdom of experience to protect others from similar harm. Madison's voice seemed to echo in her memory. "The truth has to be better than living like this, doesn't it?" "Yes," Bethany whispered into the sacred silence. "It is, and it always will be." As she left the church and stepped into the crisp evening air, Bethany felt lighter somehow. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. That belonged to her alone, shaped by tragedy but not limited by it, grounded in truth and dedicated to ensuring that other vulnerable young people would be protected from those who would exploit their trust. The shepherd had sinned, but the flock had found its way forward. Wiser, warrior perhaps, but ultimately stronger for having faced the darkness and chosen the difficult, necessary path of truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.